The summoner, enraged by the friar's tale, quaked with anger. He announced that since everyone had listened to the friar's lies, they should now hear his story. He claimed that friars and fiends are one and the same, and began his prologue with an anecdote. One day, a friar was brought to hell by an angel, and was surprised to see no friars there. He asked if friars were so virtuous that they never came to hell. The angel replied that millions of friars were in hell, and led him to Satan. Satan, with a tail as broad as a ship, lifted his tail, and 20,000 friars swarmed out like bees from a hive. The summoner's tale begins with a friar who went to preach and beg in a marshy region of Yorkshire called Holderness. In his sermons, he begged for donations for the church and then for charity from the locals. The friar interrupted, calling the summoner a liar, but the host silenced him. The friar went house to house until he reached the home of Thomas, a local resident, who usually indulged him, but was now ill. The friar boasted about his sermon and ordered a meal from Thomas's wife. She told him their child had died 2 weeks earlier. The friar claimed he had a revelation that the child had entered heaven, and that his fellow friars had similar visions, asserting that friars are closer to God than laymen who live richly on earth. He claimed that only friars remained impoverished, and thus closest to God, and then blamed Thomas's illness on his insufficient donations to the church. Thomas retorted that he had given many pounds to various friars, but never benefited from it. Irritated, the friar scolded Thomas for not giving all his money to him, arguing that a farthing split 12 ways is worthless. He launched into a long sermon against anger, telling the tale of an angry king who sentenced a knight to death, assuming he had murdered his partner. When a third knight found the supposedly murdered knight alive and brought him back, the king sentenced all 3 to death, the first because he had decreed it, the second because he was assumed to be the cause, and the third for not obeying the king. The friar continued with another story about Cambyses, an ireful and drunken king. When a knight suggested that drunkenness impaired coordination, Cambyses shot the knight's son with an arrow to prove his own control. He also mentioned Cyrus, the Persian king, who destroyed a river because one of his horses had drowned in it. After his sermon, the friar asked Thomas for money to build the friar's cloister. Annoyed by the friar's hypocrisy, Thomas told him he had a gift he was sitting on, but he would only give it if the friar promised to share it equally with his brothers. The friar agreed and reached behind Thomas, who then let out a loud fart. Infuriated, the friar vowed to repay Thomas, but was chased out by the servants. The friar then went to the lord of the village, complaining about his humiliation and wondering how to divide a fart into 12. The lord's squire offered a solution in exchange for a gown cloth. Take a cartwheel, have each of 12 friars place his nose at the end of a spoke, and let the friar fart in the center. This way, the smell would be evenly distributed along the spokes to each friar, dividing it perfectly.